Welcome to Surviving Roots, the podcast where we navigate the messy, beautiful work of healing and growth. I'm your host, Carrie Fund, and this is your space to breathe, reflect, and find strength. Whether you're breaking free from old patterns, healing from loss, or rebuilding your story one small step at a time, you're in the right place. So take a deep breath, give yourself this time, and let's uncover the tools to move forward with courage. This podcast is for you. If you've ever found yourself deep in the drama of mean girl moms on Instagram, you've probably come across Dr. Noelle Santorelli. A licensed clinical psychologist, Dr. Santorelli has spent the past 13 years in private practice and is a faculty at Emory School of Medicine in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences. In her practice, she specializes in working with high-achieving women who've experienced early trauma or grew up in dysfunctional, toxic family environments, often with emotionally immature or narcissistic parents. She also has a deep expertise in relational aggression across the lifespan, helping women navigate covert bullying from friends, family, and even the workplace. She helps break down the complexities of relational aggression, mean girl culture, and how to protect your peace in a world full of social landmines. Born and raised on Long Island, New York, Dr. Santorelli now calls Atlanta home, where she's raising 3 boys and keeping up with her endless activities. When she's not working, you'll find her listening to a podcast, a book, exercising, traveling, or watching true crime documentaries. Good morning, Dr. Noelle Santorelli. How are you this morning?
Good. How are you? Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you on Surviving Roots today. We've never actually formally met in person, but now that I know you live in Atlanta, I definitely am going to look you up for coffee the next time I'm there visiting my family.
I would love that.
We've only informally met on social media. I have to say you might be one of the coolest psychologists I've ever come across, which we will get into, but you are quite the content creator, and I started following you ever since the first post that I saw. So we've got to get into a compliment,
such a huge compliment, and I don't see myself that way. I just started this in November 2023. So it's only been like a year and a half of being in this world or this space. So that's a huge compliment.
You seem like a natural, so we have to get into that because I want to know how you juggle all of these things. For people who might not be familiar, I want to dive into a little bit who you are before we get into your work, because you are a psychologist. Yep. You are a mom of 3 boys.
Yes.
That's a whole other thing.
Yes.
A natural, you're a New Yorker at heart that's now living in Atlanta. Let's get into it. Like, can you tell us about yourself? What do you specialize in?
Sure. So I am originally from New York, Long Island specifically, because if you're from there, it's not all the same. So Long Island is not upstate, so it's a whole different vibe. So Long Island and then the city after college. And then I moved down here for graduate school. So I moved down here to Atlanta specifically to do my PhD in clinical psychology. And then ever since we moved down here, it's a long process. So it's about 10 years, give or take. So in that time, you get settled. I had my first kid. Cost of living is dramatically different, and not just cost of living, but sort of lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so it was really hard to think about, as much as I miss New York sometimes, it was hard to think about going from, a 4-bedroom house to a maybe 1-bedroom apartment in the city. So that's how we ended up staying down here. I opened up my private practice because I wanted to be able to have flexibility in my life and really sort of balance motherhood and working, because I did want to do both.
Yeah.
And so in my private practice and my training, I'm most formally trained in trauma. Okay. So mostly what I do in my private practice is trauma work, but specifically adult children, women in particular, borderline or narcissistic parents.
Okay. Wow, I knew there was a reason I connected to you somehow.
So that is being in a narcissistic or borderline family system is what I work on in my private practice. And it tends to be women that are accomplished, high functioning, and trying to break the cycle within their own family or their own generation.
Okay. Wow. You just described me to a T. Maybe that was the universe not just saying, "Hey, look at this, look at this amazing viral post." Maybe it's like you need to go to Atlanta to not only see your family, but to seek therapy.
Right. I
think I found my doctor.
I love it. I would be honored.
Should I see them first before I see you, or should I see you after my family visit?
Both.
Both, yeah.
Both. Yes, we can do the prep work and then we can do the debriefing.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, you're juggling a lot. I am going to refer to you as not only a doctor, but a content creator and mother of 3. Is balancing, a myth? Can you balance it all? How do you do this?
And I was thinking about that, because I know you talk about motherhood too and balancing on your social media. And I do think it's sort of a myth in a sense. I think there are times of balance. So I think there's times when I feel really balanced. Those are fleeting. And then there's times when I feel a little bit chaotic and out of whack. And I think it's more about the big picture. So when I sort of hone in and I'm like, wow, today was really crazy, or I feel like I was all in the work realm today, not as much in the family realm. If I take a step back, there are seasons where I'm more family oriented or more in my family work and I'm seeing less clients. Or, as of a year and a half ago, I wasn't even doing content creation. I had 2 other businesses at the time, though, but related to psychology. But I think it's big picture. So if I get anxious or lost in the weeds of, oh my gosh, I have so much going on, I have so much to do, how am I going to get it all done and be the mom I want to be and be the wife I want to be and see my friends, that can feel overwhelming. So I think I like to think about it in terms of like seasons. And those seasons can be a week. They can be 3 days. It doesn't have to be 4 months.
I love that.
So it's kind of like, can we see the forest through the trees?
Yeah.
When we think about coming into balance or alignment with our lives as busy women.
Yeah, I love that. And I know, like, for me, because it really is seasons. Like, just this morning when I woke up, I was thinking about my week ahead with my motherhood hat and like my podcast hat and all of these things. And I started to like feel myself hold my breath and like sort of panic. And then I thought, you know what? Be where my feet are. Today is Monday. We are going to worry about everything that has to do with Monday. And we are going to remember to like try to smile a little bit. If you have to cry, let it out. But we're just going to, go for it. And I feel like it's just sort of, I always have to remind myself, be where my feet are, because my mind can be like 2 weeks ahead and the world's going to come crashing down. But yeah, I love that you say that it really is seasons. And I think, for me, I've just really worked hard on not letting it take over, like just sort of pausing and being like, you know what, the house can wait, that phone call, that email can wait. I'm just going to go for a walk outside. Just sort of like trying to control it before it controls me kind of thing.
And a lot of the women I work with, myself included, we can tend to have this urgency feeling that drives us. And a lot of that can come from early childhood experiences. Yeah. But there's sort of this urgency feeling that you're talking about, like, I've got to send this email, I've got to wash these dishes, I've got to get, the kitchen cleaned up before bed. And so sometimes just being aware of that sense of feeling of urgency and then checking in with yourself and saying, wait a minute, is this really urgent or is this just a feeling? Because, we also always talk about feelings are feelings, thoughts are thoughts, facts are facts. And so is it a fact that the kitchen has to be cleaned or that email has to be sent? And if it is, by all means, do it, right? So if it's a fact that it's an urgent email and you must answer it, do it. If it's a feeling or a thought, I would encourage you to think twice about it.
I love that. I
love that. Being aware of that sense of urgency helps me some with the balance and being able to step back.
I love that. That's a good tool to use. When my kids are not around, my kids are sort of like my little checkers, because I never want to like pass on the anxiety, and I don't want to pass on. I only want to pass on my good things, not the things that I'm still working on in adulthood. So when they're around, I'm sort of more hyper aware of like, okay, I don't want to pass on anxiety. But when they're not around while they're at school and I've got all this stuff going on, I'm not so worried about my dogs getting anxiety for some reason. So that's a really good tip that you just shared. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I mean, there's so many things that we can talk about, but one thing you really focus on, and especially the content that I love watching you, is this mean girl culture.
Right.
That's something when I think of mean girl, I think of Lindsay Lohan, I think of middle school, possibly high school. Can you define what mean girl culture is and why you're so passionate about it?
Yeah. So to me, mean girl culture is this idea of not being direct, not being authentic, not being honest, and instead using subtle tactics to cut at people's relationships and interpersonal standings, how they look, how they appear, or even how they're experienced in other relationships. So, yes, that happens in middle school, primarily because we would hope that at the younger ages, people don't have the skills to communicate or engage in conflict resolution appropriately. A little more developmentally immature. We hope, we kind of expect that as people grow, they develop the ability to be introspective, to sort of be mindful and aware of how their feelings are coming out, how to address conflict or conflict resolution. Unfortunately, I have noticed that there are many women, and some people come at me and they're like, "Well, what about men?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I know. Men are jerks too." But I'm talking about women because that's my experience.
Yeah.
I don't hang out a lot with men, but sure, I don't mean to just say this is in women, but historically speaking, women are taught to be nice. Women are taught to be polite. Women are taught to get along. And so women have learned historically to use what is really called relational aggression, which is the mean girl. To sort of help people understand what it is, I use the word mean girl culture, but it really is a psychological and social construct of relational aggression, which is just different than physical aggression. Physical aggression is someone annoys you, you're angry, you show it, and you physically harm them. Relational aggression is you're angry, you're hurt, you're confused, you're jealous. You don't show it. You show it underhandedly by using tactics like gossip, exclusion, manipulation, triangulation, to sort of impact the person through their relationships.
Wow.
And it is very present in women, not with middle school girls.
I was just going to say, I know a lot of people listening right now are honestly either checking themselves or checking some of the relationships that they're in,
And the way I sort of came to this, obviously in graduate school, we talk a lot about relationships. And with my work in private practice, working with dysfunctional systems, dysfunctional family systems, I started to realize, wait a minute, this same system that operates in a borderline or narcissistic family with the parent is the same system that's at play in toxic friend groups.
Wow.
With certain women acting as the borderline or narcissistic parent, and I'm not diagnosing them, I'm just saying they had traits of those same behaviors. And then there'd be other people in the friend group, kind of like minions or like the children, who run around and walk on eggshells or shapeshift to get approval or find themselves caught in a triangle. And I was like, this is the same system. And it's got to be doing the same kind of damage.
And then how is it affecting the kids of those mean girl moms?
So then it goes even deeper. Cycle. Yes. And so then when I realized that, I was like, wait a minute, this is really bad because it's not just impacting us as the women, but it has a trickle-down effect to our children. And so I found myself with my oldest son. So I've got a 16-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And so my first rodeo with my oldest son, I was not expecting this. This was not on my radar to be dealing with this type of system or dynamic as a grown woman, a mother with children. I feel like having children humbles you in a lot of ways.
Yes.
Or at least it did me.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
It sort of, gets you in touch with sort of your humanness, whereas I used to be able to, work endless hours at the hospital or in grad school. Having children, you can't get it all done. You have to balance differently. And so I think I was expecting most women to have gone through a similar path or journey and sort of meet me where I was at. And that sadly was not the case. And sometimes I think as mothers, we're so desperate for connection that certain groups can be very intoxicating.
Yeah.
They can be very validating. They can be very just sort of charming. And I found myself in a toxic friend group, and I didn't even realize it until I realized it.
Yeah. I can relate to that. I feel like especially not only does motherhood humble you, but also it's that balance of like fighting, like, well, this is who I am now, but what about like who I used to be, and finding that whole balance. And then for me, like, at first I sort of gravitated towards like moms and groups that sort of like allowed me to be like the old Carrie and the new Carrie, until I realized that doesn't really work. Especially for me, I realized because I don't think you can ever really be the old version of yourself after you have a kid. It's really a lot of self-acceptance and realizing, nor should I want to be, because that's not really the best mother. I'm supposed to be the best mother I can be. But you're already sort of like in it, like these relationships and these toxic groups. So as you're becoming self-aware and as you're in your mothering and you're growing and you're changing, you're like, oh crap, like, wait a minute. Like, I'm sort of in circles and groups that really are not healthy, or they don't bring out the best in me, or, how do I break up with adult friends?
Yeah.
So you really bring up such good points. What are the signs or the red flags that people, everyone listening or myself, are like wondering, okay, is this a toxic friend circle? Is this a toxic relationship?
Yeah. Well, one thing I always try to be sensitive to is that we want to be careful, because I'm also not into massive cutoffs or sort of overreacting. So I always want, my clients, people watching my content, to think about, is this a pattern or is this an isolated event?
Okay.
So I don't, I'm not out here to say, let's demolish women's friendships. That's not what I'm trying to do at all. But I think we have to be careful to look at patterns of behavior over time. So if you start noticing, okay, every time I have a get together with these women, every time it's book club or it's a dinner or it's a something, I feel anxious or I feel uneasy, or I'm spending more time than I normally would thinking about what to wear, how to arrange the night, just putting too much thought and effort, or more than you normally would, that's one sign to me.
Wow.
So when you start having some feelings inside about prior to getting together, that's a sign that I wish I had listened to.
Okay.
Another sign is if you're in uncomfortable situations. So let's say you're at the dinner, or you're at the book club, and there's conversations being had, and you get this little sort of feeling of, I don't feel good, or this doesn't feel right. Again, if it happens once, twice, fair. But if it keeps happening continuously, that should be a sign to you that something isn't sitting right in those relationships. And lots of times we can't say what it is. That's part of the problem, because a lot of this stuff is so subtle. Relational aggression is designed to be covert. And so because it's so covert, it starts to make you almost gaslight yourself. You're like, is this really happening? Did she actually just say that out loud? So you start second guessing yourself, and it's almost crazy making in a way, because you're thinking, is it me or is it them? And so if over time you keep having those thoughts, those worry thoughts, those sort of second guessing yourself, to me, that's a huge red flag to just take some inventory.
Okay. Wow. And, boundaries can be some of the hardest things to set. Once you lean into these things, these signs that you just mentioned, like what's the next step? Do you communicate this with your friends? How is that received? You talk about, not promoting isolation, but what is, like, let's use me as an example. I just listened to these signs. I think to myself, oh, wow, I'm experiencing them all. What do I do, Dr. Noelle?
Yeah, I think you have to be careful. So this is where it gets really, really tricky. And I get this a lot on my social media. People are like, cool, but now what?
Yeah.
Which is a fair question. And this is a new area in terms of being spoken of outside the field of psychology or social psychology. There's not a hard and fast answer, unfortunately. And so each situation is so individual. But what I tell people is the first thing you have to do is think about what is your objective. So in every social situation, there's three things at play. You've got your objective, which is what you want. You've got your relationship, which is how you want the other person to feel about you. And then you've got self-respect. How do you want to feel about you? And in each situation, we have to consider, what is my objective? What is my relationship objective? And what is my self-respect objective? So, for example, let's say that I have multiple times met with the same women, and multiple times the same woman has said something negative or degrading about my kid. Like, well, that's great that they're so, focused on socializing, but my kid's really focused on academics. It's sort of like an underhanded dig, right?
Yeah.
Like most of the time, they're not going to come out and just say something rude. They're going to make an underhanded dig, right? So let's say this happens time and time again. I have to take inventory of that particular relationship. I don't recommend in general having this conversation in a group setting, but privately attempting to isolate the person who you're specifically feeling the tension with, and then thinking about, with that person, what is my objective? Is this someone whose friendship I really value? Is my objective to try to repair? Is my objective to get an apology? Is my objective to show her she can never talk like that again to me, right? Yeah. And it's going to vary in every situation. And then you want to think about, what's my objective with myself?
Yeah.
Right? How do I want to feel about me? If I continue to let it happen, that may erode my self-respect. Or if I'm a type of person who flies off the handle often, saying something might erode my self-respect. Maybe I have to learn to tolerate things more. So it's very, very person-specific, which is why it's so hard to give a blanket statement. Yeah. But I think as a general rule, if you notice this happening, the first step is you have to take a step back and say, what am I looking for here?
Yeah.
Am I looking for connection? Am I looking for acceptance? Am I looking for approval? What am I trying to get out of this friend group or this relationship?
That's really powerful, and it's pretty straightforward. I know a lot of us, I used to struggle with people pleasing a lot. Now I really am not so into the people pleasing, obviously, because of my content. I don't really care so much about pleasing others, just, being authentic and honest with myself and using my voice to inspire others. But, I know that can be really hard just with creating boundaries and dealing with people pleasing when it's trying to even have that talk with a friend, especially because then even if you have that talk and communicate your feelings with that friend in private, you wonder then, are they just going to go back, and then how are they going to explain what just happened to everyone else? And then you think everyone is talking about me, which is then another question to ask yourself. If you're worried about all of your friends talking about you, maybe that should be taken into inventory as well.
Exactly. And that's exactly why this gets super complicated, because when we're talking about friend groups and this relational aggression, the fear is you have a private conversation, and that conversation, the fact that you're even questioning, will this be kept private? That in and of itself should be a red flag.
Yeah.
Right. And these are all the things that I learned, unfortunately, by experience. I did not have this in high school. I did not have this in college.
Yeah.
I would like to think there's somewhat of a northern-southern difference.
I want to know what your opinion of that is.
From my personal experience, it feels different. I grew up on Long Island. I think there was an emphasis on direct communication, more so than I've observed in the South. Now, with that said, I have a ton of people reaching out to me from New York, New Jersey, that are struggling with Massachusetts, that are struggling with very similar situations. So I sort of lost that sort of veil of, oh, well, it's just in the South, because I've heard these stories of women in the North where it sounds extraordinarily similar.
I think it's everywhere. I was just more curious to see how the women behave differently as mean girls, because I know from my experience in the South, I have a lot of family in the South, and I'm not talking about my family, I'm just saying in general. Right. And I'm originally from West Virginia, a country girl from West Virginia who moved to Manhattan for 16 years, and now I'm in Miami for 11. So I'm a little bit of everything. I'm a bit of a mutt. But even if you go to the country, or if you go to Atlanta, or if I'm back in New York, I think there's mean girl culture everywhere. I just think some people are more polite about it. So I think you start to gaslight yourself a little more, like, oh, well, they can't have meant that, because, until maybe you get the bless your heart, and then you're like, wait a minute, they did mean that.
They definitely meant it. Yeah. Yeah,
they definitely meant it. So I definitely think it happens everywhere. I just think it's decorated differently. But I was just wondering, because you're an expert, how you feel about that.
From what I've heard from the women I've been working with, the stories sound very similar. I still would like to think in the North it is a little more direct. Like, well, I'm just not going to invite them.
Yeah.
It's almost like a bring it. Like, it's almost a more in your face, like, well, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I think down here, I've noticed it is a little more under the radar. So, all the women might be planning something and you just might not know.
Yeah.
So I do think it's a little more subtle, but I've been surprised at how similar even the sort of how it plays out so similarly.
Yeah. I mean, either way, all around, it's hurtful, and it's something to deal with. So what you're saying is a healthy response for you wouldn't be just to sell my house, pick up, and move.
Unfortunately, no. But I will say
that's a trauma response somehow that I'm not dealing with.
Absolutely. Like, for some people, and there's this, there is sort of a tendency, I will say, for people who grew up with any kind of relational trauma or relational dysfunction within their home, there is a tendency for those women to be primed to find themselves in toxic systems or friendships or friend groups as adult women. So there are certain markers from those early experiences that make people more likely. And so some of those are familiarity with manipulative behaviors. So you either are used to dealing with it or accommodating it. So if you grew up walking on eggshells or accommodating a narcissistic parent, you're going to sort of fall into that pretty easily. That's one way it can go down. Another way is, so you're used to managing it, so you slip back into old habits and you manage it.
Yeah.
You just do what you've always done. There's also a lot more people-pleasing characteristics in those individuals from their past. Where you you can fall into these old responses, just like when you are an adult and you go home, even in a healthy family, you fall into your childhood role a lot.
Yeah.
And so we sort of have that same experience happening, but in adult friend groups.
Yeah.
You can fall into your childhood role.
Wow, that's very interesting.
In that system.
Yeah.
Very why a ton of insight and mindfulness. It truly is. Everybody wants like a quick, like, how do I deal with it. And it's so complicated that you're taking into account so many different personalities. But the thing you can best do is be aware of what's going on inside of you in those situations.
Wow, I never considered, what you just said about falling into those, like, I guess, childhood systems in a toxic friend group. Because my mother, I'm estranged from. My father, he lives in Miami, and he's respecting my boundaries, and he's a great grandfather to my kids. But he had an injury about 2 years ago, so I'm slightly like a part-time caretaker. And It was about a year ago when my husband said, wow, it's so interesting to see how you slip back into like little Carrie. And I didn't even know you during your childhood, but you're just a different person around your dad. When he said that, it really fueled parts of my healing journey that even now on a day-to-day basis when I'm with my father, like I am very aware of making sure like what sort of shifts me there and what doesn't, and how I can sort of like create a boundary like right there, whether it's a conversation or something happening. But I didn't even think about that in terms of friend groups.
Yeah. And when your husband called it out and said, wow, you're like little Carrie, you probably had zero awareness until he said that.
Zero.
And that's what happens is we get into these systems and we don't know it till we know it, till somebody says something, someone close to you, right? So sometimes there are sort of those longer standing friend groups that are healthy. Sometimes it might be someone in that group who says, you seem different when you hang out with so-and-so and so-and-so. Sometimes it's that, a healthy relationship or friend group calling it out to you or saying, I don't feel like I know you when you're with those people. Yeah. That's sort of a gentler way of saying, who are you in that system? And who you might be is an earlier version of yourself.
Interesting.
And there's something from, a psychological concept called repetition compulsion. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
no.
Okay.
I'm writing it down. I'm going to look it up.
It's repetition compulsion, and it's an old sort of psychoanalytic concept that we have a compulsion to repeat the same toxic relationships that we have not mastered throughout our lifespan as a subconscious desire to be able to fix, correct, or heal a relationship we have not been successful at healing.
Okay.
We try to repeat it, and it's a compulsion. So you might see similar patterns in the relationships you engage in. You're never going to fix it. You're never going to correct it. You're never going to heal that early relationship.
Right.
But we play it out in the current dynamic.
Interesting.
And you want to be aware. So again, awareness, insight, taking a step back, taking inventory of what is driving me here. Is it anxiety? Am I driven by anxiety? Am I driven by fear? Am I driven by a need to belong? Or am I going because I genuinely enjoy these conversations?
Yeah.
And the time with these women.
Wow, you're giving us so much to think about. As an adult, I may sort of like not make this a priority at times, like trying to communicate these things or even do this. But if it came to my child, I would want to nip it in the bud immediately. So the question that's coming to my mind is, what do you do when, because right now we're talking about like, okay, adult woman to adult woman. Yes. But what do you do when there's a mean girl kid that's being mean to your child? And maybe you're friends with the mom, or maybe you're not even friends with the mom. Right. How do you handle that? Because that's almost like my mama bear comes out and I want to nip that in the bud immediately.
Yes.
What's your advice on that?
So I think, and again, both professionally and personally living through this, I think recognizing that it's happening is number one. So lots of times our default as parents might be to say, so I hear a lot of people saying, oh, it's just it's middle school, or, you know what, because we might be triggered or anxious. And so we're hoping it's just middle school, or, you're just reading it wrong, right?
Yeah.
So we almost can engage in the gaslighting in a sense, either because we're nervous and we're like, oh, please just let it be middle school. Please let's not, I don't have the bandwidth to deal with a major drama right now, right? So part of it is like, oh, please. Please don't let this be an actual thing.
Yeah.
And then part of it is we don't know what to do. We don't know how to help them.
Yeah.
And I think we can help them the same as we help ourselves. So I would have similar conversations. I would say, well, let's talk about this. How do you feel when you hang out with Susie? Tell me how you feel. Do you feel excited? Do you feel happy? Do you feel sad? Do you feel nervous? What do you think you want in the relationship with Susie? Do you want her to like you? Do you want her to invite you over? Do you want other people to like you because you're... So doing some self-inquiry and self-exploration is, number one, it's helpful in helping them to learn how to assess their needs. Because lots of times as adults, we haven't been taught how to assess our needs in a relationship, in a friendship. Right? We might do it in romantic relationships, but not as much. So I would have a lot of conversations about the sort of underpinnings of this friendship in a child-friendly language. And again, I'm talking middle school and up here.
Yeah. Okay. And then when do you decide, or when do you know if it's time to reach out to the mom, to the parent?
Yeah, that's where it gets very interesting, depending on the friend group. So when I see a pattern, I've seen a pattern of behavior, again, not a one-time thing. So I'll try to help my kids or my clients first sort of use some conflict resolution skills on their own. So first we're doing like a personal inventory of, okay, what does this friendship mean to you? That's like kind of more big picture. That's that's more the forest, right?
Yeah.
What does this friendship mean to you? Why are you in this friendship? Is it because it makes you popular? Is it because you feel cool? Or is it because you genuinely enjoy? So we try to do some self-inventory as a first step.
Okay.
And then we'll try some conflict resolution. So then we'll say, okay, let me help give you some words for how you could manage this.
Okay.
Why don't you ask Susie why every day this week at lunch she said, ew, I don't want to sit next to Sarah. And she sat at the other table. So I might say, okay, why don't you take her aside maybe before carpool, or we'll kind of problem solve together a strategy for how to talk to the kid themselves.
Okay.
If they've talked to the kid themselves and they've had no luck, at that point, depending on how much it is dysregulating or harming your child may not care, right? Your child may be like, well, I'm over it now. Or, every personality is different.
Yeah.
When it starts to have sort of a more pervasive or global impact on a kid's mental health and functioning, that's when I think, okay, it's time. But of course, you try things first. You don't want the parent call to be the first call unless it's like the person's being physically harmed or, very, very blatantly bullied.
Yeah, because, as an adult, you can't go and yell at little Susie yourself.
No, believe me, I've wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, I want to take a turn for a second because you mentioned the name Susie and it just made me think of a reel that you did maybe like 2 weeks ago or something of all these like naming these little kids or something, and you were talking about like their personalities, and Susie was one of the names. Let's take off the psychologist hat for 1 second, or maybe just shift it so the content creator hat can fit.
Sure.
How did this begin? Because you are a natural. I mean, you're hilarious. You're quite cool, and you're very hilarious. So,
thank you.
How did you know? Like, what made you pull the trigger on that first reel, Dr. Noelle? How did this happen?
Okay, how this happened, and I'll be really honest with you. How it happened is this was a major personal struggle for me a couple of years back. Major struggle. And again, as a psychologist, I felt very confused and very triggered and very sort of in Twilight Zone, bizarro world. Like, what is happening? I can't find my center. I cannot find my center. And I realized there was very limited, there were no resources. I'm a researcher at heart. So there's a problem. I'm on Amazon. I've got that book, at my doorstep by 5 p.m. that night.
Yeah.
I'm going to research it. I couldn't find anything that really quite hit. So I did my own personal growth work around this.
Okay.
And then 2 of my kids remained at the school where some of this stuff had started. Mm-hmm. And I had gone to this annual event that kind of like a field day. Uh-huh. And I went and I felt so much peace at the event. I felt so much peace. And I was like, wow, this is an event that I've gone to yearly. And I have really lived a lifetime in these events, like going from being excited to going to this field day with a big group of moms to feeling nervous to go because there were friendship fallout, to feeling angry when I was there, seeing some side relationships. So I really had run the gamut. And I went to this event and I said, wow, I feel whole. I feel centered. I feel great. And I was like, because, and it sort of clicked for me, I broke this cycle in my life. I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid. I'm not driven by approval and acceptance. I was driven by, what are my kids enjoying here on this field day?
Yeah.
And so I got to my office because I had a patient after this field day event. And I said, I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to, and that's the reel I made that went like bonkers.
Yeah.
That's the reel that kind of went really viral, where I just said, let's talk about these adult cliques and mean girls. And I was literally in my jean jacket and sunglasses coming from field day. And it was one of those things where I was like, I'm just going to say it because it felt so powerful to me in that moment. Just how much I had grown from that experience.
Wow.
So and that's how it started.
Look at that. And then you got bit by the bug, and now look at you. Well, I mean, how do you do it? How do you juggle this? Like, your real life inspires your content, obviously, but how do you excuse me, Mrs. Or Elizabeth, I have a content idea. Like, how do you juggle psychologist and content creator?
Yeah.
Do you take notes? Do you film? Do you create ahead? Do you schedule? Like, how do you balance and juggle all of this?
So I'm really relatively new to this, and so I am learning as I go. So, and the reason I actually first even started an Instagram page, and this is going to be, people still think this is crazy, because I don't have a website. And
I mean, you don't need one.
I never have. So I've been in practice for 13 years. Yeah. Again, I did grad school in Atlanta. I did postdoc here, my fellowship. So I have a lot of connections in Atlanta for private practice through my mentors and graduate school program.
Yeah.
So I didn't really need a website. And when you work alone, I'm not in a group practice. I'm solo. I can only see so many people a week. And so I don't have a website. So I have one company. It was called Daily DBT, where I did dialectical behavior therapy with a partner. And another one was I have a continuing education business where we do continuing education workshops for other therapists.
Yeah.
But we had decided after 13 years to close Daily DBT because it was really hard. We were both moms, and so it was really hard to have a structured, every Tuesday at 8 a.m. because without fail, one of us would have muffins with moms, or it would, they would both be on the same. It was just really, really hard.
Yeah.
So, but I had gotten a lot of my referrals through my Daily DBT business.
Okay.
And so I thought, I've got to have some online presence. I can't just be out there, out there. And so I felt more comfortable with Instagram. It felt easier than starting a website.
Yeah.
So that's how it really started. Then that Mean Girls Mom reel went viral. And from there, now I will say in high school, my whole life though, I've been very into performing arts. So I used to dance. I was in theater in high school. New York, I grew up eating, drinking, Broadway. I love creativity in that sense.
Okay.
And so I got that is a part of me, talking about who you become as a mother, sort of keeping those old pieces, or sometimes even seeing old pieces of you come up that you forgot you had. So once I started doing this, I was like, oh yeah. Before grad school and motherhood, I loved being creative and in a performing arts kind of a way.
Yeah.
So it just sort of clicked.
You are so creative and you are so funny. You might be one of the coolest psychologists that I've ever come across.
Thank you so much. That means so much to me. I'm a little wild for some people's taste, I'm sure.
Oh gosh, I love it. When I heard the Law and Order audio on that one reel, I was like, look at her. And then the most recent one in the Jeep. I mean, I just love it. You show up and you know that like they're authentic and they're just like you and your personality. I can only imagine how much fun it actually would be. I've never been to therapy, but I've done constellation therapy one time. I've never done therapy. And I think like, I don't know. I wonder if being a client of yours would be as fun as watching your social media. Like I might need to dip my toe in the pond.
I will say I have a lot of fun with my clients, but then I also say, for people who find me on social media and want to become a private practice client, I am a lot more serious.
Yeah.
I'm still fun, I promise, but I do use humor a ton in my work. A ton. You have to.
Healing. You have to.
You have to. And I build rapport. I have very deep connections with all of my clients, which is part of why I keep my practice so small. Yeah. So I build really deep connections with my clients. And then eventually, so that we can have fun. So we can have fun together. I can call them out on their bullshit.
I love that.
And they can call me out on mine. That's fine. So, I do say it's a different persona a little bit. It's more my authentic self on social media because I'm not working. But in the therapy room, I will be a little bit more reserved, at least initially.
Yeah.
But it feels great to break out of, I work with heavy stuff all day. I work with trauma all day. And so to jump out and be able to, be doing something funny or silly feels really healing and refreshing for me.
Yeah, I love that. I find your humor healing, and I get so much from your social media. And I'm always waiting for the next one. It's been a couple days since your last reel.
And so that's
get on that.
I don't plan. So that's the problem. Is like I don't plan it. I just do it when I have an idea. Yeah. And so if life gets in the way, and I've found myself having that urgency thing or that irritability when I'm like, ugh, I just want to film content. I don't want to be doing therapy today, and I'm like, hold up.
Yeah.
You have your lifetime to do this. Like it's supposed to be fun. And so when it stops being fun, that's when I make myself take a little bit of a pause.
That's very important for everyone listening. Yeah. I mean, if you don't have joy while you're doing something, then it is just work.
And then you have to ask yourself again, what is my why? Why am I doing it for likes? Am I doing it to get approval? Or am I doing it because I genuinely am having fun and had an idea and I'm enjoying connecting with all these people? Yeah. So coming back to the why.
Yeah. I will say one of my biggest whys has become just connecting with people like you. Yeah. Watching this podcast has fueled my own healing. But honestly, even my husband has noticed this past year, I'm vibrating on a whole other level and I couldn't figure out why. And I can sit there and look at my to-do list and things like, okay, book proposal, that stuff, all these things are checked off. But no, it is the constant human connection. Yeah. Even if it's in person or on Riverside or on Zoom, it is just the conversations and the constant connection with just these amazing, wise individuals that is just raising my vibration.
Same.
It's just been
when I have women that reach out to me, that say, thank you so much. Like not everyone has the resources or ability to get in one-on-one therapy. Yeah. Right. They just don't. And so to have the ability to touch people's lives and make them feel not as alone as I have felt through that situation or in other situations in my life, that feels so rewarding to me. that me making a funny video can really, really be the thing someone needed to hear. That really helps them or gives them the power to say, you know what, I don't have to deal with this. And it will be hard. And so with the mean girl stuff as adults, as none of it's easy. There's no easy answer. None of it's easy. It's all going to feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If you're making a change in any area of your life, you're going to have discomfort. And the question becomes, are you going to choose comfort over change?
Yeah.
And I don't make that decision for any of my clients. Like, I'll support them in whatever they choose. But you have to know you're making a choice, and you have the ability to make a choice. You're not actually stuck. You can handle uncomfortable situations and come out the other side.
100%.
Right.
100%.
And sometimes we forget that we can. We can do hard things, but genuinely we can. We can.
Yes, we can. I want to thank you so much for today. I know anyone that's listening that this conversation has resonated with, whether you reach out to Dr. Noelle for private sessions, or you should just follow her on Instagram, because you will feel seen and heard and get amazing tips on how to handle things while laughing.
Good.
Where can people find you?
So literally only on Instagram.
Okay.
So I sort of have a website. So if you Google my name, I have sort of a little like landing page for my private practice. Unfortunately, my private practice is full. So the only way I sort of market or advertise myself is on Instagram. Okay. I'm hoping at some point, maybe in this year, to roll out some webinars or do some more lives, or, people are asking for things. This is hard to put into a course. But there are certain things about living authentically and seeking authenticity over attachment that I do think can be packaged into webinars or courses. So for now, it's just Instagram. On my Instagram, there is a link to my private practice like landing page where you can sort of send me a message or get on a wait list. Okay. But hoping for more things in the future.
Wow. And what is your Instagram handle?
Oh, it's Dr. with a period. So Dr. Noelle period Santorelli at Instagram.
Amazing. Dr. Noelle, I want to thank you so much for your time and your wisdom today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Surviving Roots. I hope it gave you something meaningful to carry with you. Let's keep this conversation going. Find me on Instagram at carrie.fund, where I'll share more from the show. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone who needs it. And remember, we are the choices that we make.